Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Negative Space panel. We have a very exciting one today, which I'll let Josh get into. Only quick announcement that I have from Negative Space is we're coming down to the wire. We have a few days left in our pitch competition. It's looking like one of our best ones yet. We're super excited. Remember, we're taking 2 to 8 page pitches. We have editors from a couple of publishers doing the judging. You can find out everything on our website. I'm going to put the link in the chat very soon. But yeah, we have about, I think it's 4 days left before that one closes. So if you want to pitch and pitch live at our next event, now's the time to do it. So don't miss out. And we'll get right to it. I'll bring our trusty host, Josh Sippie, back in. Hello.
Trusty, I like it.
I know, I'm gonna keep trying to figure out good words for you. All right, let's get to it because this is an exciting one. I'm gonna get out of here. Enjoy. Thanks, Josh, and thanks everyone for being here.
Welcome, everyone. Like he said, just 2 quick reminders. We do have the Q&A. It is open for questions. There is a Q&A button on your dashboard. Ask your questions as soon as you have them. If they're relevant to the current conversation, I'll get to them right away. If not, I'll hold them till the end, but I will get to as many as I possibly can. So make sure you get them in as soon as you can. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another one. So look at negativespace.com/events. Go there, or negativespacecomics.com/events. All right, so today we're talking about getting comics into traditional publishing, getting an agent, and more. So let's welcome our guests. Our first guest, Jamar Nicholas, is an award-winning Philadelphia-based artist and educator, dedicating his career to helping young people realize the power of visual narrative. Jamar aims to promote anti-bullying, healing, and kindness in his work. His graphic novel, Leon the Magnificent, was published with Scholastic Graphix and is the first book in his series featuring Leon and his friends, Carlos and Clementine. His next book, Leon the Magnificent, will be released in 2024. Jamar, welcome aboard.
Why? Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Oh, and the book that just came out is Leon the Extraordinary.
That's it.
Magnificent comes out next year, but thanks.
I read the same title twice, and I'm like, that's not right.
It's all good. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here tonight.
Of course. And our second guest, John Gallagher, is the creator of the critically acclaimed Max Meow series, the art director of Ranger Rick magazine, and the National Wildlife with the National Wildlife Federation, and co-founder of Kids Love Comics, which promotes literacy and the magic of comic books. He also leads workshops teaching kids how to create their own comics. John, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you both for being here. So I want to start where we always do with that warm-up question. Jamar, I'll start with you. I want to hear your creative origin story. What made you want to tell stories in the first place?
Oh, that's a great question. My origin story begins back in the black and white ages of the early 70s. I grew up a big fan of comic strips. I got into comic books later in life, but I was a big fan of Doonesbury. As a 5-year-old, I don't know what kind of attachment I had to that, but there was something about Gary Trudeau's mastery of this world he created. No one drew like Trudeau, and even his noses and all of those things were just so pronounced and odd to me. I thought, wow, that's crazy. I can go into a place and create a whole thing from scratch, and people will just have to accept it. So from there, I was kind of hooked on telling stories using words and pictures. And the story just kept going. In 1998, I self-published my first work in the industry, the Jamar Chronicles. And I haven't stopped since.
I love it. So John, same question to you, your creative origin story. What made you want to tell stories?
Well, I was a kid, like 5 years old. It really does go back that far. And I always tell people it's my mom's fault because I liked Dr. Seuss, but my mom bought me a comic book and it was a big Treasury edition, giant size Shazam book. And that combination of words and pictures just like lit up my life. And I started drawing right about that time. And what really got it going was there was another book that came out made by Jules Pfeiffer called The Great Comic Book Heroes. And in it, it had like the origin of Superman, Batman. It was like basically a who's who of all the characters, the Human Torch, all the things from the 40s on. But what was neat was in the foreword, he had a drawing that he'd done when he was 14 of a comic book cover. And that's when I realized I could be doing this. And that's, I think the first comic I created myself was called Transmission Man and Carburetor Kid. So it's, it's pretty highbrow stuff. And I've been drawing my whole life ever since, and really always enjoyed not just drawing, but telling the stories that went with it.
I'm curious then, because both of you have obviously the stories you're working with now are for children's literature. So I'm curious, John, we'll start with you. What pushed you down that age range or that audience?
Well, it was sort of by default because I had always wanted to do comics. My dream was to draw Batman, and I was lucky enough to read some really great comics as they were coming out. And when I finally hit that point where I had decided to self-publish, I couldn't get hired. I'm like, I'm going to self-publish. And I looked at the industry and I was like, what is not being done right now? And at the time, there were really not many kid-friendly publications. Jeff Smith's comic Bone was only about a year old. And there was sort of a big crater where kids comics could be. So I decided to do something. I did, actually, this is a later version of it, but I did a book called Buzz Boy, which was about an upbeat superhero who has his own diner instead of like a secret hideout. And it's funny because what I thought was a kid's publication, I probably would not think of today as being that, but that was the inspiration. And it just sort of, I intended to do other things, but this just took off for me. And I realized what I was creating were the kind of comics that I enjoyed as a kid. So that's why I do that.
Jamar, what about you? Why children?
What's really interesting to me is that probably around the mid-aughts, so like 2008, 2009, I got earmarked to do the adaptation of Jeff Canada's memoir, Fist, Stick, Knife, Gun, A History of Violence. And it was a really chilling snapshot into the lives of city children, kind of specifically boys, but we never really talked about that. Growing up in the inner city and having to fight for everything, even if that's not your nature, was a look into Jeff's life growing up in the 50s and the 60s in the South Bronx. But when it came to me, and they asked me if I would like to adapt this, the same things that Jeff went through in the 50s and the 60s, I went through in the 70s and the 80s in West Philly. So you see, like, nothing's really changing, and actually things are getting worse. So I had this moment to capture the attention of young people and tell them about, solutions, or maybe you can get out of a situation that looks really bleak. And after that, I was really kind of just like honed in on talking to kids. And I had another project before that. The Gross Adventures was a Tokyo Pop project. It was kind of like an early reader's gateway manga series that I illustrated. I didn't create it. It's a really cool writer named Annie Auerbach created it. And I had so much fun, Josh. It was probably the most fun I ever had on a project. And I was like, is this what doing kids' books feels like? This feels great. And, promoting the book and going out into the world and having kids like be really excited and like, oh, I've read this 3 times and the cover fell off. There's something I never got from doing comic books, for people with full beards, never said things like that to me. So it just kind of led me down this path into making my audience kids. And I think I'm going to stay there as long as I can.
I love that. And then you both actually mentioned the route of self-publishing, that you had self-published something before you had gone this route. So I'm curious, Jamar, we'll start with you. What prompted you to pursue self-publishing, and if that was like a last resort or if it was just something that you decided to do?
Well, in the 90s, the landscape for getting into comics was a pretty thin line. Either you drew like Marvel style or like Jim Lee or something like that, or you didn't have a job in mainstream comics. So I think, you saw probably in the late aughts that the doors kind of blew open and you see so many cartooning styles in comics now, which is really cool. But back when I started, it was either, I can't draw like these people, but I didn't necessarily want to draw Batman, which is a little different from John's origin story. And I always had my own ideas that I wanted to put out there. So it was just kind of pre-internet, the real internet. It was more like Prodigy and AOL. I just started doing research, like, how do I do this? How do I get into this industry? How do I print things? And I just jumped off the cliff from there. So I didn't spend a lot of time trying to do portfolio reviews and get into Marvel or DC. I always had my own lane I wanted to be in.
John, what about you? What pushed you to self-publish?
So when I was I studied graphic design in college, and I basically do school during the day and come home and draw for 4 hours comics every night, and was self-teaching myself how to do that. And I was sending in submissions to, at the time, it was like Kamiko and Innovation Comics. It was like late 80s. And I still remember, I still have all my rejection letters. And one of them basically said that my art reminded them too much of Chuck Jones from Bugs Bunny cartoons. And I was like, well, that's great. And then I realized, oh no, that was an insult, or that was a critique. And
Right.
so I kind of, after showing stuff at conventions, I kind of hit that point where I was sort of like, wow, I may just have to do this on my own. And it was kind of exciting because I realized that I had always enjoyed coming up with my own characters and pitching my own ideas. And it just became, like Jamar was saying, it was a project. Like, oh, I'm going to research this as much as I can. The internet was still pretty new, so there wasn't a whole lot on there, but there were some books, and there were plenty of professionals that were happy to talk to me. And by the time I self-published, I had my own graphic design company. I was working for myself and had a couple freelancers working for me. So for me, I just made it another business project. And I tried to treat it not as, oh, I'm just a guy creating a book, but more like, here's my company and this is what I'm doing. And because if I didn't take myself seriously, no one else was going to.
That's so true. So let's talk then about the route of traditional publishing and what that's been like for both of you. So John, I want to start with you. What made you want to go the traditional publishing route versus all the other routes you can go to get comics out there, specifically for Max Meow, and sort of what got you down that traditional publishing road?
Right. Well, that was always a goal, because really, I think for most artists, it's how many people can I reach? How can I get my message out there to as many people as possible? And traditional publishing, even more so than what we think of as a mainstream comics publishing, it will reach an even bigger audience. And I will say that, because one of the things Jamar and I talked about before we were gonna come on here was say, like, yeah, you can work with traditional publishers, but I spent over 20 years self-publishing, meeting with people, doing projects with people. So it can be a long road or it can be a short one. But I just saw the value in that certain ideas were going to work better if I was going out for that general audience. And I had come up with the idea for Max Meow through an after-school comics class I was teaching with some kids. At the time, I was calling him Captain Cat. And really, it was all about my son was a huge Dogman fan, and he got so excited. So we're working on this idea. And at that point, I was like, I don't care if I just do this for myself, because I'm doing this with my son. I can sell this at shows. But then I saw that Dogman had a 5 million print run on its next book. And I reached out to an agent who said, oh yeah, I think people are interested in this. So it was definitely a case where I think they're all valid paths. I think there's some books that are going to work better with going for that traditional, whereas others, Kickstarter or a show may be the better way to go.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot you said I want to get back to, but I want to ask Jamar, what made you want to go traditional publishing?
I want to jump on a lot of the things John said because we kind of share some similar paths in this part of our careers. And just to be transparent, John and I are old friends from the comic book trenches. So we're kind of like sharing these stories between each other and all the cool things that are happening right now. So after self-publishing and doing web comics and doing mini comics and doing all of these things for a long time, when I came up with Leon and we did a Kickstarter for it, was it 2017? Leon Protector of the Playground came out. And I think at that point in time, you saw a big shift in comic books and kind of like the material they were putting out in the world. This was kind of like during that rush of hyper violent comics, like Kick-Ass, and all the kind of like bloody chiclet teeth comics was a big thing. And I say all the time that I think it's really foolish to chase trends. And I had already had Leon in my back pocket, but I was feeling like at some point people are going to get sick of all the blood and guts, and what's wrong with kind of hitting a reset button on all of this and starting with a kid who just wants to help people. Like, how novel is that? You know what I mean? It wants to be a hero for the original reason that we love hero stories, not wielding a hockey stick and breaking people's heads open. So I went this route after we completed the Kickstarter and made sure all the backers were fulfilled. And I took Leon on the road. I was going to comic book conventions because that's the lane that I came up in, doing comic book shows, doing, comic book like one day shows at the airport hotel, those kind of things. And I was really fortunate to sell out of all my books. And I started feeling like, well, I feel like there's a bigger audience out here, and rather than putting a box and stick like a rabbit trap in front of my table, hoping a family walks by, why don't I go find where these families are? So, I started looking into traditional publishing, like what's ALA, the American Library Association. They have a midwinter conference. What are all these things? It's a whole new world. And, just that early curiosity started making me steer to a different direction to put Leon out into the world in front of more people.
Mm-hmm. So you both touched on this, and I want to now ask you about sort of putting those initial feelers out, how you approached agents, what sort of responses you were getting, that kind of stuff. So Jamar, let's start with you. What you mentioned going to conferences. Were you actively querying agents? Did you feel like you knew what you were doing, or were you kind of just flying by the seat of your pants?
Well, this is a really interesting thing, and maybe this might be some meat in the sandwich of our conversation here. I'm pretty much a dyed-in-the-wool comic book guy, right? And I think where the landscape is right now, with people being really curious about literary agents and that whole side of the fence, there wasn't a lot of information out there as far as comic book people are concerned. And I built up a career over 20-something years doing comics, so it wasn't really a thing of like, oh, I'm going to go get an agent. It's kind of like figuring out by falling down a lot that if you need to kind of get to the next level, you probably need an agent. And that's something that's still kind of new in the comic book circles. We're still kind of learning about this. So it was more of me kind of like rebuking my training. It's kind of like resetting my button and figuring out like, okay, so I know how to do this and I've been doing it for so long, but they do it like this and I have no idea how this world works. So I didn't traditionally go down the path of querying and looking for these people. I was really fortunate enough to be in spaces and being around in comics so long that I was friends with agents who were kind of in that comic book space. And I would talk to them about things, not necessarily pitch them, but it was more like picking their brains. How does this work? What do you do? Why do I need you? Why do I need you? Right? Because like I said, the space that we came from is like, we built careers already. So now there are people saying, well, this is how you do it over here. So you need to kind of like explain why that's necessary. I don't mean to ramble, but it's, it's a lot. So it's something that I've been slowly learning about, and I'm kind of building the airplane while we're flying it.
It's never rambling if it's useful information, and that was. So thank you.
All
John,
right.
what about you? What were your sort of initial forays into traditional publishing like?
Well, the best way to sort of went back in the early 2000s, the best way to kind of reach out to the general entertainment industry was to go to San Diego, to the Comic-Con International, and or New York Comic-Con. It seemed like, there were publishing houses in New York, there was entertainment in San Diego, the studios, and I would set up at those locations and try to get people interested. I had one San Diego Comic-Con where I had something like, I was like 6 different animation studios gave me their cards, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's all going to happen. And of course, nothing really progressed from that. But I was in New York, and one of my friends had just gotten a deal with Simon & Schuster to publish his books. My friend Jim Gownley, who does a book series called Amelia Rules. And I said, wow, this is really your year. And he said, this could be your year too. It's just, you have to look at things differently. And one of those was to maybe don't think that you need to do the next Batman or Robin, or just open your mind to what the audience could be ready for. And I started talking to some of my other friends there who had agents to find out about it. And that was kind of how I met a lot of them. A lot of it was just asking people for advice. And, that's one of the great things I think about this industry is I think we all want everybody to succeed.
Yeah.
Like there used to be a sort of cliched term of team comics, but it was very, very true. And I was lucky enough that the friends I had were people like Jamar or Raina Telgemeier. And I think she went on to do some cool stuff. I'm not sure. No, I know that Raina Telgemeier's Smile is like one of the biggest selling graphic novels of all time. And it was really great because even though I met some agents and they were not interested in Buzzboy, they knew that I was someone who was listening to what they were suggesting. And that's a big step in having people consider you down the road.
So when it came time to choose an agent, were you dealing with multiple offers? 'Cause it's a huge decision for writers. So John, we'll start with you. Did you have multiple offers, or was it just you saw this agent, they were perfect for you, and you just knew? What was sort of the experience there?
Well, I had met a couple agents, and over the years, and it was really like, I think I met this person 10 years before I closed the deal on Max Meow. Their phrasing was, I'm not your, I said, would you represent me? And they were like, well, I'm not your agent unless I sell something for you. So they didn't want any money. They didn't want any, me to give them anything, even sign a contract with them. I met other people who I liked, but what was really great about this person was they were always willing to listen to what I wanted to do and be excited for me, but also be honest with me. So the agent that I have is Judy Hansen, is someone who I really respected already and was the first person I reached out to when I had this idea. And I knew there were other people, but I had the list of people and it just sort of clicked. It was the right timing with what I wanted to do.
Jamar, what about you?
Not exactly the same thing. John, I'm just going to ride your coattails through this whole interview. But a lot of those things ring true for me too. It's kind of being in the comic book space and being around, and we were in a lot of people's orbit for a long time. So I'd be at New York Comic-Con and people will come by like, oh, somebody told me to come see you. Tell me about these things, so it's almost kind of like the swap meet, and I'm showing you my wares. Here's this thing, and I do this, and this guy jumps through dimensional tunnels. Oh yeah, here's my card, let's talk. You know what I'm saying? So I think maybe my story's a little different than, say, somebody who's, starting out right now with a very nice leather attaché case full of manuscripts, you know what I mean? So I was introduced to my agent and my agent's Dan Lazar, and he's at Writer's House. And we had been talking for 10 years before, it was mainly me not getting my act together enough to really put some stuff forward for him. But he's very patient and is always looking out for my best interest. So it's like, when you're ready, send me some stuff, you know what I mean? And that process was a really long thing. And like I was saying earlier, I think I spun my wheels a lot just because coming from this other world, wasn't necessarily sure that I wanted to be here. Like, what is this? I'm in a new fish tank, breathing different water. So after I got over some things and figured myself out, we put our foot on the gas.
So before we move on from getting an agent, there's a question in the Q&A I want to get to. What kind of writing and art samples do agents typically want to see from writer illustrators wanting to break into doing kids' books? And follow-up question, are there good shows or cons to meet agents? So I'll toss that up to whoever wants to take that first.
Ooh, John, you want to touch that?
Well, I'll just say that I think it's been said before, the way into the comics industry, or just like publishing, it's a different path for everybody.
Yeah.
What I will say is that what I found was is that the publishing houses do not necessarily, like, I was walking around with like a finished Buzz Boy, and I'm like, okay, here's my book, buy it. And what I did find was that some of the places, they were looking for things that might be finished, but a lot of them were looking for something to help develop, because they kind of know what their audience is looking for. So if something looked a little bit rougher, that was okay. It was more about the concept. So when I reached out to the publishers that were with my agent, I had written up like almost like an Amazon listing. If you're gonna see your book listed in a thing, describe it like that. And then there was maybe a 1 or 2 page description of the idea for the series and the book. And then as far as pages go, I mean, I think it can really depend. They kind of want to see you can do it. And but like I had said, for Max Meow, I had already decided I was doing this, and I had already penciled, inked, and colored and lettered 70 pages of Max Meow. Now that's a lot more than most people. I think anywhere from 6 to 15 pages I've heard a lot of people have submitted. Jamar, I don't know anything.
And if they want to see more, they'll ask for more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also something to not freeze yourself out, like over planning for what you think they may want. Give them what you have, and if they're interested, they'll ask to see more of it.
I will also add that if you go to an agency's website, they'll tell you what to send them, and make sure you send them what they tell you to send them. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
So once you guys got an agent, what changed, or did anything change? I mean, did all of a sudden your work life or your writing life kick up a notch, or did not much change? Jamar, let's start with you.
Well, like I said, I had had a really long span of time working with my agent, and a lot of it was just me trying to just figure out what I needed to say and how this was going to work. So when I stopped stepping on my own feet, I would send things in and get really good feedback. Like, this sounds good. Why don't you, work on it some more, or why don't you kick this around a little bit more and send it back to me? And there was a really strong kind of like tennis match happening with the work, and it all kind of depended on me. And I think what changed in me was the idea that, which I feel like everybody has, is that things are only going to move as fast as they're going to move depending on what you're doing. So, if you're somebody who's I've got 1,500 ideas and here's this one, here's this one, you're probably going to strike pay dirt probably faster than somebody who has one and it takes them 8 months to send things back. But, that's like, your mileage may vary with things like that.
John, what about you? What's it been like working with an agent, especially in that early going?
Well, there are some places that'll say they only want to hear from an agent. And the reason that is because there are so many of us that want to get published. If an agent, I'm sure if Jamar's agent reaches out to a publisher just like mine, if they are saying, hey, here's something you should check out. They're putting their reputation on the line. So in a sense, you've already been vetted. You've been looked at. And that is it's kind of like that's the gatekeeper. And if the agent will say to someone at Random House or Simon and Schuster, you should really check this out, they're going to at least give them the time of day. Whereas they see an awful lot of ideas. And, it's not always like that. Like Jeff Kinney was at New York Comic Con and he walked up to the publisher at Abrams and just showed his stuff. But they were looking for just that kind of thing at that moment. So It really can change. But for me, especially because I've done now 4 Max Meow books and the 5th is coming out, a lot of that was the agent sort of had assured them like, okay, he wants to do a series and he can actually get it done. Because there's an awful lot of people that have a lot of promises in them, but getting the actual books done is not accomplished by everyone. So it made it that much easier. They already kind of believed in what I could do because the agent told them so.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good segue because I wanted to talk about that first book deal that your agent got you and what that process was like. So John, was Max Meow an easy sell? Was it like as soon as it went out, it was done? Because that submission process can take a while too.
Right. Well, that was one where the agent I was working with, we created that Amazon, basically I knew I wanted it to be a book series so we were going to pitch 3 books and I basically wrote a tiny description of each book. I had the pages put together and there was some concern that maybe my coloring wasn't the right match for what the industry was looking for. So I also had a PDF that was in black and white and had like a 1-page that described the series, something that had all the characters. And if you've ever looked up like an animation pitch, that's the same thing that you're essentially doing for graphic novels. And as far as would it work? Well, I'll say that we sent it out to, I think 5 or 6 publishers. And I'm not going to go into details except to say, not everybody said yes. And some people said no like that. But then the people who said yes got really, really excited. And it was one of those things, it was like, it took forever until suddenly it happened in a second. It's like the overnight sensation only took 20 years, but then it happened. And then it seemed easy from that point on.
Yeah. Go ahead. I mean, Josh, go ahead.
I was going to say, what was your experience with the book sale?
Yeah, it was a lot like what John said. And there's so much prep and there's so much kind of like, I don't know, almost like training, like you're getting ready for the Olympics. Like, okay, I'm doing my push-ups. I'm doing my wind sprints. Where, at one point, whatever we're deciding to go forward with the pitch is kind of getting ironed out and hammered down. It's like, is this the language you want to use? What are you thinking about this? How do you see this going? Is this a series? If so, again, like, give me a couple of elevator pitches for some more books in the series. And all that stuff kind of gets packaged up. And then the agent goes out and says, okay, I'm querying this list of publishers, and then we'll just wait and see. So that wait and see thing is really tense, as you just can't really. It's hard to go about your day when you have this query out in the world. But it starts to slowly trickle back, like the boomerang slowly comes back around. It's like, okay, just heard from these people, they said no. Just heard from these people, they said no. This person said no, they said no. Oh, these people are interested, but we'll talk about that later. You know what I mean? So you just kind of hold your bucket up, hoping things land in it, and then you kind of go from there. But once you're kind of in that world, it's really thrilling, And but also, like John was starting to say, it's not also a slam dunk either, and kind of being in a world where you're used to rejection. Like being in comics, and even when I was younger, I wanted to do comic strips, and I have a drawer full of rejection letters from the syndicates. It doesn't crush you when you get those emails. It's kind of like, oh well. In a way, it's almost relief. I would rather have somebody say, you know what, no, we're not interested, or we can't sell this, or this isn't right for our list, than them going, yeah, sure, let's give it a shot, and it all falls apart, dramatically later. So it's almost like, okay, well, now I know those people weren't right for this anyway. So it's a little bit of a 50-50 rejection.
Mhm. So Jamar, you ended up going with Scholastic Graphix. What was it about them that was right for Leon?
I mean, like just the name alone, and just the imprint that Scholastic has on the American consciousness. Everybody, almost everybody who grew up in the States has some sort of memory of Scholastic. Either it's the book fair, or the bookmobile, or one of the earlier magazines, or Clifford the Big Red Dog, or something. So even just saying, "Oh yeah, Scholastic," and people kind of have that, like, you know, that nostalgic memory. You know, that alone, and just, you know, their reach is something I really wanted for Leon. Like, I just want kids to be able to get this book easily, you know, and, you know, having a machine like Scholastic, and also being really fortunate to be on an imprint like Graphix, you know, kind of raises Leon's sale a little higher. So, you know, I this is the best place I could be.
I walk by the Scholastic office in New York, and there's always a giant Clifford whenever you walk by it. So that's their thing.
Yeah, Clifford's the man. Yeah.
John, what about you? You went with Penguin Random House, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what made you go with them?
Well, first, I didn't know that they had a bookmobile. I wish I had seen the bookmobile. I lived in rural Pennsylvania, so I guess I didn't get to see that. But
I had the bookmobile.
Wow, that's really cool. For me, because Max kind of fit in that it was for boys or girls and the age range, for me, it was a match of, it was really something that Penguin Random House they had just had a discussion, like, this is what's in the industry, we need to add some more of this. And so they were very positive about Max. What made me excited about working with them was the opportunity. The editor that they had assigned to it is Shana Corey, and she had worked on a series called Baby Mouse by Jennifer and Matt Holm. And that was a book series that my daughter grew up with. I would read to her, and I got the feeling that I remember thinking, like, okay, this art's not my style, but they really get what kids are excited about, you know. And then I'd try to read, you know, and I love Power Pack, but from Marvel, but I would try to read the Power Pack comic, and my kids would be like, huh? Like, they would it was maybe written a little too clever. So and they just started up Random House Graphic, which was their kids graphic novel line. It's kind of a different setup than Scholastic, in that that's an umbrella over Random House children's books and things like that. So I kind of like that it's both a graphic novel and a children's book company. And I feel like I've gotten out to kids that may not have, might have been shooed away from graphic novels a couple of years ago. Although thankfully, I don't think that's the case anymore.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm curious if there was anything unexpected in the traditional publishing journey. You know, you get the agent, you work with them, you sell the book, and then you work with an editor there. Is there anything in this process that was unexpected to you? John, we'll start with you.
You know, it's funny. One of the things that self-publishers need, and it was true of me, and it's true of some great people that, you know, leave Marvel and DC, and, you know, the Image guys are a great example, is everybody could use an editor. And it was kind of shocking to have the editor come back after I had pitched had given them the thumbnails for my graphic novel, and have some edits. Like, I was used to just sort of doing it like, hey, I'm great, everybody always told me this. I remember being just like devastated. Yeah. Like, oh, they hate it. And then I realized, like, no, this is just all making it better. And so the big surprise for me was how rich I feel like my book got with the input that I was getting. And usually it was just an editor. I think more than one person was looking at it, but this editor had a way of not just saying, well, maybe we can do things differently, but at the same time could make things even better. And that's probably the thing that I appreciate. I mean, the other thing is, it takes forever to get your book out. I mean, my book has to be done a year in advance. So book 5, which comes out in November, was done last November. And I'm working on book 6 now, which is coming out in like 2 years. So that's another thing. So hopefully I didn't step on that, Jamar, but I'm still mad about that bookmobile thing.
Well, yeah, sorry. But yeah, again, I mirror a lot of what John says. And again, being in this comic book space for so long, you're used to just kind of flourishing your pen, and then you send it in, and it gets printed, and then you may see it, a month later, and go, "Oh man, is that really a word? Maybe that's not really a word. Maybe I should have asked John to look at this first." And just having a real eagle-eyed editorial red line through your work just makes it better. And I've taken the stance of looking at it through the window of being a comic book guy, and just kind of how much of a learning experience that's been for me. So, me having to break down some of my own walls, and even some people that I've talked to who are really curious, or, maybe connected to me in some way, they say things like, "Oh, well, wait a minute, you write and draw these books, right?" "Yeah." "So how can they tell you it's wrong?" It's like very base questions. I'm like, well, it's a little more nuanced than that. And the idea of someone plussing your work, it's kind of strange to some people. Maybe it's a trust thing, maybe it's a power thing in some people's heads. But I think if you allow yourself to enjoy the process and know that at the end of it, your work's going to get better, you'll get past that.
Mm-hmm. I like that, knowing that it's going to get better. We have a question from the Q&A that I think is pretty relevant right now. So what are the trends you are seeing that agents and publishers are looking for now in kids graphic novels? Yeah, Jamar, let's start with you and then toss it to John.
I mean, I'm no agent, so I'm not sure, but just looking at the bookshelves and just seeing what kids are connecting to right now, it seems like magical kids stories seem to be really interesting. Not necessarily, I'll say Harry Potter, but it's kind of like, magical schools seem like really popular, and cute is always is really on trend. Just cute as a thing, cute with the rainbow. Seems to be really tracking. And but I'm not necessarily sure, because like John said, things are so far down the line. So even say if somebody who's watching right now went out and landed an agent, and then landed a book deal by the end of this year, by the time they get to the end of the year, there could be something else that they're into. You know what I mean? So like I said earlier, I try not to chase trends. And I would hate to see somebody go, "Oh, they're looking for zombie westerns. Let me do a zombie western." I think that's a road to ruin. And if you have kind of like your own kind of thing in your head you want to develop, you should just try to run that to the end zone rather than switch gears and try to do something that people think they want at this moment, because that could change like the weather.
John, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say, I think what Jamar said makes a lot of sense, and it is true, because I'll compliment that person, because I asked that exact question to an agent 5 or 6 years ago, and they said what Jamar said, which is, you can't even think like that. You have to think about what's the story you want to tell, and that will have authenticity. If you just do something because this is popular, it sometimes will show that. And I think if you look at, like, my son Will, he's a little older now, but he grew up sort of in this, I would run all of these graphic novels by him. So he loved Dogman. He loved Smile by Raymond Tugemeyer. His absolute favorite book is not my book, it's Leon by Jamar Nicholas. And he just loves it. But he has also enjoyed, Amulet by Kazuo Kibuishi. If you look at those, there's such a combination of, or not combination, a variety of ideas. There's fantasy, there's telling your own sort of personal story, I think is super. You can never underestimate the power of that. And it doesn't have to be an autobiography. It can be more like a fictionalized version of someone's life. But I think, again, it's the authenticity that comes behind it. And because the worst thing that happens is someone says, "Oh, we're not interested in that," and then it's up to you to say, "Oh, well, what's something else I would want to do?"
Those are great answers. You answered the next question in the Q&A, which was, should we chase trends? Which you both said very conclusively, you should not. So I'm curious because it feels like children's graphic novels are the ones that are going the traditional side. And I wonder if either you have thoughts on why children's comics have gone that route, whereas adult comics really haven't as much yet. John, let's start with you.
You know, I think part of it is that I would say that in most cases, when I have seen adult comics go out there, they're sort of wedged in between novels and things like that. And I think that the children's publishing, they had a way of sort of differentiating because they had picture books, they had chapter books, and then this could be something else that could go alongside it. And I think a big part of it is because of the people who pushed them, and that was librarians and educators. And they didn't care if it was a comic or not. They just wanted their kids to read. And I think that made it an easier push. I'm a huge fan of all comics. Like, you know, I read lots of different stuff and have for years. And it really is interesting to me. I would love to see that big breakthrough of a lot of the mature audience comics. But I mean, it is one of those things where instead in the comics industry, you had to go from the adult and bring it down to the children. We're almost seeing the complete opposite right now in the publishing industry.
Jamar, anything to add?
I have nothing to add to that.
So I also want to follow, because you're both artist and writer, obviously. And that seems to be the trend with a lot of the children's graphic novels that are out there. You see a lot of writer illustrator combinations. I'm curious if you think that makes it easier to sell, because it takes more time for you to do it. So Jamar, I'll throw it to you first. Do you think it made you more marketable that you were both the writer and the illustrator?
I'll say yes, in the degree that maybe there's something about being an author, illustrator, or a cartoonist, as I'm more comfortable calling myself, because there's a track record of like a really easy through line from the beginning and end of a project. I think the idea of having a writer create a manuscript and then having to find an artist to illustrate it, and just that static in between, I'm not exactly sure how that world works because I've never been part of that. But I think it's not as easy as a forecast as somebody who's like a complete package. Just I'm saying that in this instance of your question. I know, they come to me, they ask me a question, I have the answer, and there's nobody else to ask. So maybe just logistically, it's easier to do projects with one person than two, or one and then having to hire out somebody else to finish it. But that's just my guess.
John, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see that combination of a writer and an artist occasionally, but it seems that's more like chapter books and it's occasional illustrations. I think when it's an ongoing narrative, right now at least, the publishers are more comfortable with someone who's doing it all. But I would not discount the power of the right team. I think the thing is you might have to approach it as a team to get represented, and that's hard because an agent might only be representing one of them. And I do understand that does seem hard in some ways, but I think it may be just a progression of the industry to keep going in that direction and trying to find the right partner, because message boards have found some great partnerships that have created some great graphic novels.
And and if you read PW, Publishers Weekly, enough, and you see the new sales lists, you see a lot of teams that pick up a book deal, and this person's agent is this, and the illustrator was unagented. I see a lot of that more than I see that two people were picked up by the same agent. So I mean, I'm curious to see how that plays out also in people's deals.
That you'll see a lot of agents who represent just illustrators who, they sell the script and another agent brings an illustrator on board. So there are those other routes there. So before I let y'all go, I want to give you a chance to promote what's coming up and any parting thoughts. Where can people find you online, on social media, all that good stuff? If you have websites, books coming out, books that are out, this is your time to throw them out there. So I see John probably reaching for a book. So let's start with John.
Well, I don't have a copy of the latest book, but my next Max Meow book is coming out in November. That is called, which one is it? Let's see. Taco Time Machine just came out. Max Meow Taco Time Machine. It's actually will be called Attack of the Zombies, which is about zombie bees. It's actually an idea that I stole from my comic retailer friend, Mark Nathan, who runs the Baltimore Comic Con. He always said he was going to do a story about zombie bees, and he never did. So I was like, that's too good of an idea not to take. And then actually the thing that I grabbed, because this is where you say like, oh, I'd be so happy if I could do mainstream books. In October, I'll be drawing Iron Man for a book that kind of combines what we've been talking about. Abrams, who did that really great Alex Ross Fantastic Four graphic novel this year, they're doing a book called Marvel Super Stories. And it's got a bunch of superheroes, the mainstream superheroes drawn by kids comics creators. I'm in the first book. Hopefully Jamar will be in the next one. But there's, people like Nathan Hale and Lincoln Paris, who does Big Nate. Like, they're all getting their shot to do some superhero comics. And I'm really
Jerry Craft's in there too.
Jerry Craft is doing Black Panther. Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Okay, so I'm still on the campaign trail for Leon Extraordinary, which just debuted last October. So we're kind of close. It's 6 months now, something like that. It's been out. And I'm also looking forward to Leon the Magnificent, which should be out spring 24. So I'm very excited. If you haven't picked up Leon yet, correct that. Thank you. So also like websites and stuff. So people can find me on jamarnicholas.com, also on Twitter @JamarNicholas, and my Instagram, which I'm very salty about. I had to start my Instagram over, it got nuked, and I had to create a new account. It's the worst. So it's Jamar_Nicholas_cartoonist at IG.
And John, do you want to throw any websites or social media out there? You don't have to. I just want to.
Yeah. If you go to maxmeow.com, you'll be able to see previews of the books and also learn about the characters. And there's even activity sheets. And just look for John B. Gallagher on Twitter and Facebook. And love to hear from people.
Awesome. John, Jamar, thank you both so much for being here and for taking the time to do this. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. This was great.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, so to all of our listeners, we're going to be back in April 12th. We're talking to Ryan and Zana. So we hope to see you then. And until then, good night.